Mhm.
All right, well, we are 2 minutes after the hour. We are going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody. My name is Matt Reichert. I'm the Director of Outreach and Engagement at GIA Publications. Welcome to our 8th conversation in our Homecoming Conversation series. I'm going to let everyone else on the panel here introduce themselves in a moment. What I want to do right now is give you just a couple of quick instructions. I know many of you have been with us for our conversations before, so I will go through this quickly. At the bottom of your screen, there is a Q&A feature where you can submit a question to us, and we will do our absolute best to work through as many of those questions as possible. So please, if you have a question you would like to submit, do it that way so we make sure to see it. We are archiving the chat feed here, so as you are looking through all of the information and people are sharing ideas, know that we will capture that. So if you want to go back and wonder what so-and-so said the other week, we'll be able to share that with you also. Then for today, our purpose is really to do idea sharing, to try to come up with solutions, suggestions, what might work based upon the general guidelines from the FDLC, based upon the guidelines from your state, and most importantly, from your local diocese. So to do that, we are going to be focusing on page 9 of the FDLC guidelines that we discussed on Wednesday. If you weren't able to join us for Wednesday's conversation, on GIA's Facebook page and our YouTube page, you can see that conversation with Rita Thyron and Monsignor Rick Hilgartner, and you can watch that later to get a good understanding of these guidelines, where they come from, and some of those objectives. So just know fdlc.org/COVID is where you can get your copy of these, and we'll be looking specifically at music ministry today. Before we go on, Kate, why don't you start, if you would introduce yourself, and then Michael, and then Wendy, and then we can start with our first discussion point.
Sure. Before I introduce myself, I just want to say, Matt, thank you for hosting so many of these conversations. We know that this, this crisis is evolving on a daily, sometimes hourly basis, and new science is becoming available to us, as well as new guidelines. And I'm just grateful that we're able to have this conversation together while it's happening, instead of waiting until we see what happens. And I also think that this is going to be a really interesting documentation of the church's journey through the COVID-19 process. So I'm just really grateful that we're able to share this time together. So I'm Kate Williams, I'm the Senior Managing Editor at GIA. Michael?
I am Michael Silhavy, Senior Project Editor at GIA, and about 30 feet away from me is
Wendy Silhavy. I'm the Senior Coordinator for Liturgy and Music for the Archdiocese of Chicago in the Archdiocesan Worship Office. And yeah, I'm about 12 feet below Michael right now.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. I mean, thanks to all three of you, especially you, Wendy, for joining us today. Again, as I mentioned, on Wednesday, we had this extended conversation with Rita Thyron and Monsignor Rick Hilgartner about the FDLC guidelines. We're not going to get into all of the bigger details for the FDLC guidelines in this conversation, because we started that in the previous conversation. But to reground us, Michael, I'm wondering if you would be able to share with us or talk real briefly just about some of those general principles that you and I explored with Rita and Rick on Wednesday, just to, again, reground today's conversation.
Yeah, I think, well, there were 7 of them, and I'm sure we will keep coming back to them, and we'll also make them available in the documentation we send after this. But the first thing that we wanted to stress, Rita wanted to stress, was the common good is our priority. So the common good right now is outweighing liturgical sensibility or ideal performance practice. The common good is our first priority. We need to remember that these policies are being defined in phases and regionally. The timelines and the locations are not meshing up across the country. So you might be hearing things or able to do things depending where you are. We need to remember that there is no national way to do this. We believe there is some benefit in continuing to provide telecast masses, and we can even also talk about televised prayer experiences, what those might be. But we're learning that this television, computer, social media contact is necessary. So interacting people through the media. We need to remind ourselves also that I think at this point in the entire country, the dispensation from attending Mass and receiving is across the country. So we are operating under this grace period of dispensation. So we're okay. We need to preserve the liturgical year. We joked about, let's not come back in a couple weeks and say, well, since we did get to do Easter 9 weeks ago, let's do Easter today. No, of course, we still will continue to do our Sunday readings, and the liturgical year remains intact. Most of all, communication with our parishioners, with our ministers, with our communities is essential. Keep in touch. We were talking yesterday, we heard some really depressing information that perhaps it's typical for a parish to only have about a 30% correctness of emails with their parishioners. So how do we keep in touch with our people if we only have about 30% accuracy? And once again, we're thinking the long term. Thinking the long term. Not knowing how long this will be, we're still thinking long term. And back to the point one, it's all about the common good. So those are the principles we were trying to stress in the last episode.
All right, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for walking us through that. I am going to share my screen now, participants. And what I'm showing to you is page 9 of these FDLC guidelines. You'll notice that these are the guidelines for music ministry. And in particular, we want to walk through these bullet points. I know we have a question, several questions from people submitted before today and already in our Q&A feed about the prohibition of congregational singing. So let's take a look at that first bullet point in the FDLC guidelines. Temporarily, music ministry may be limited, perhaps one cantor, one instrumentalist to lead the assembly. Let's start with this question of congregational singing. If your diocesan guidelines limit people singing in the pews, what ideas do we have to still provide music or incorporate music in our resumption of public worship? I mean, Kate, Wendy, do you want to kick us off on this one?
Yeah, I would say, first of all, I want us to remember that one of the primary ways that people are going to continue to engage in a Sunday celebration is via a live stream or some other virtual way of connecting to liturgy. So if not all of your gatherings where people are physically present might have a cantor singing or might have music in one form or another, consider still offering one Mass a weekend that will be live streamed, that will express more of the fullness of liturgy where things can be sung. And I'm seeing, I'm trying to keep up with different guidelines in different dioceses too. I saw one today from Cleveland where they said expressly, like, for instance, the psalm may not be sung, the psalm must be recited. Even in wrestling with that particularity of a guideline, consider that one of your live stream options might offer a sung psalm. Check, make sure that's okay in your diocese. But also, is there a way that while the psalm is being recited, can you still play the melody of the psalm, setting that your parish knows? Or if not underneath the spoken text, could it be while the psalmist is walking up to the ambo, just so that we can maintain that sound of the season? Is that an option for you to consider? I know that when they say one cantor and one instrumentalist, in dioceses like the Diocese of Cleveland, that will mean a keyboard instrument, as they have expressly forbidden the use of wind instruments. So that's one caveat you also want to make sure that's clear within your diocesan guidelines. Wendy, did you have anything else to add to that?
You know, the most important thing I'm thinking of is that this is, these are steps. I mean, the idea that we're on a phased plan is really important. And so what's helpful for me is to keep in mind the principle of progressive solemnity. So if we can clearly communicate to our people that, you know, we're here out of safety, we are limiting congregational singing perhaps, we are limiting singing or, you know, larger ensembles in our churches, but we're here. And in the idea of progressive solemnity, we'll build from that. This is not where we're going to stay, but out of an abundance of caution and safety, we're going to be here for now. It's also a time to communicate really well some formative principles with people, that we might not be singing the glory in church right now, but here's why we normally sing it. And this is why it's important to sing in church. This is why it's important to sing the liturgy. So it's a time for education. I think this can also go for choirs. I mean, we know that if choir, this is a quote I'm stealing from, but if choir only means singing and performance, then we might have to stop choir for a while. But if choir is about formation and perhaps doing a book club on Sing to the Lord, or teaching your choir how to read music. There's a great book that World Library Publications has published by Jennifer Kerr-Budziak, I'm pretty sure, about sight singing. It's published in English and Spanish. Now's the time to take the time to teach your choir to read music, so that when you come back singing fully, you're able to do that even more, you know, with more facility. So I think the same thing can go for our assemblies. Formation, formation, formation. The idea that you're only reaching 30% of your people is a little daunting, but how else can you reach them? What can you make available for people to understand that what we're doing now is perfectly acceptable, but it's not normative for our long-range hope of full active conscious participation?
Yeah, I want to jump in. I'm also trying to follow some of the chat comments and suggestions. And a couple of people are talking about that, playing the music underneath the psalm, going back to the psalm. And forgive us today. I think we're just going to be kind of all over topics here. But that also could allow, for people to hear the psalm refrain in their heads. It would allow those at home, perhaps, to sing along in the privacy and safety of their home. And as long as we're on the psalmody thing, I just want to throw this out also. We're going to be finding new ways to do things. And if any of you have been to a religious community, and I'm going to single out St. John's in Collegeville because that's my preferred one, they speak the Psalms sometimes. And before you go, oh, no, there is a way of speaking a psalm that is musically inherent. Have mercy on me, God, in your kindness. In your compassion, blot out my offense. Oh, wash me more. And what if our congregations could learn how to speak the psalm or encounter that? So I think we're having a fun time envisioning new ways. Could the psalm be recited antiphonally from side to side of the church? So this is what excites us, finding these new ways of doing things. So
remember that time you rapped the Jeleno Psalms, Michael?
We're still talking about that, yes. No.
They really are.
That'll have to be conversation 9 in our series, is
Yes.
Michael rapping the Delano Psalms. I mean, one of the things too, I mean, to back up here, sticking with bullet point 1, obviously no singing, if that is what is happening in your parish or in your diocese, doesn't necessarily mean no music, right? So we have a lot of organists, a lot of piano players, a lot of accompanists who are watching and listening. Any best practices that we can provide in terms of pointing towards resources or strategies, thinking about instrumental music in a different way, in not to replace, but to still provide that connection to music, to still provide that other sensory connection?
For me, I think the sound of the season is a big deal. And I know a lot of scholars have done a lot more in-depth research on this. I think Don Salyers is a great person to tap into if you're looking for more insights on sounds of the season or sensory experiences in general. But for instance, if I were to hear the melody, I know what season it is, and I'm immediately transported into Advent. And there's lots of those examples in our liturgical year. So, one of the things I've always loved about our catalog at GIA, and I know there's lots of places that you can get resources like this, is our amazing offerings for instrumental music. We've got piano collections by Paul Tate, Krista Silva, Jeannie Cotter. We've got these amazing guitar ensemble arrangements, both presentations by Bobby Fischer and Steve Petronak, that really do not just an adequate representation of what a season sounds like, but they really take on the idea of that song, that melody, that tune, and make it into its own worthy, standalone, beautiful thing. And I think this is a perfect time to utilize some of those arrangements, whether it be for a procession while the ministers are walking in, whether it be underneath the communion procession. And this is the time where some of those instrumentalists can really shine and can carry that sound for all of us.
Yeah,
and I think it's good too to think about the way we can use music in our other sacramental celebrations, or in many parts of the country, we're just barely opening up for the sacrament of reconciliation. People are going to be extra nervous going into a church with all these new protocols, and where do I stand, and where's my mask, and all these things. And so we know that the therapeutic value of music can really play a role here. Maybe you as an instrumentalist can provide an hour's worth of music for sacrament of reconciliation. So thinking about how people are going to encounter our buildings in a completely new way, even outside of a liturgical celebration. And how can we, welcome them back to our buildings?
And what I was going to add to that, I think this is also an opportunity for us to think about how do we continue to engage others who are active in our music ministry. If you're going to provide for an opportunity for instrumental music to be used, you're also potentially providing an opportunity for others to continue to contribute their gifts. If you have more than one accompanist, if you have that person who has wanted to participate, who can play the piano but is nervous about accompanying the choir, here's an opportunity to be inclusive and to continue to reach for the gifts of other people. I want to move to the third bullet point here, removing hymnals and missalettes from pews and storing them using projection and screens or produce a simple disposable worship aid for every Mass. I know this is something that we've been thinking a lot about, obviously, as a publisher of hymnals and missalettes. Let's talk about this bullet point, because I know we're getting questions about this too. Removing hymnals and missalettes is a part of the FDLC guidelines, and I think just about every diocesan guideline we've seen so far. How do we consider using the material in hymnals and missalettes if we've removed them? What are the ways that we can continue to use those resources?
I before we talk about that, I do want to just go back to the removal of them. We made a conscious effort in our parish to remove the hymnals. We boxed them up this week, and I did a little Facebook capturing of it. And, it was kind of a touching moment to pick up the hymnal and to put them in the nice banker's box. And there might be people, once again, safety is the concern here, but could this be done by the cantors or music ministers or someone? It might be a nice spiritual moment for them. If you have donor plates, how nice it was to look and to see if you can think where this family sits or who this person was. So it was an odd moment to interact with the hymnals and missalettes as we put them away. I think we also talked about that it would be nice, could they maybe be stored in their boxes in the back of the church, in the gathering space, in the music area, and it might look a little messy, and that's okay, rather than just let's put these things in some closet with the mops. You know, almost this sense of we're longing for these things. They're right over there, but we can't use them or touch them. We're talking about, is it the type of thing where, once again, with good safety, can you give someone a hymnal or missalette to take home so they can interact with the streamed liturgy or use it for their own prayer? So even before we start thinking about what we're going to sing from these, I think some care and concern, and there might be some creative ways to deal with the hymnals and missalets as we're putting them away. So thanks for that.
Yeah, I think amongst our staff, even we've talked about it. It's so sad to think about putting hymnals and missalettes away after everything we know that they mean to us, and after, you know, we spend our whole lives talking about how the weight of these items carries the weight of our ministry, and it's supposed to carry that weight for us. And like, this is a sad time for us, but also like, we have other things that we say goodbye to sometimes, and then we welcome back. Like, for instance, every Lent, we say goodbye to the Alleluia, and we miss it while it's gone, and we joyfully welcome it back on Easter time. So it's almost like I've had this desire to kind of write this special blessing that we do while we're putting the books away, and have one that we know is ready and waiting to bless them again when they come out to be a part of our worship. I think in the meantime, a lot of us know that and are using already a printable resource, a printable like worship aid, and a lot of those are being even emailed or available as a PDF on parish websites. And that will carry us in the meantime. Another way that I think is super compelling to consider, besides investing in a hymnal or a missalette to purchase for an individual in their home, is we have a hymnals app, and I can get, my church has Ritual Song 2, and I can get the Pew version of Ritual Song 2 on my app, on my own device that I can disinfect however much I want and that nobody else has to touch ever. And I always have it with me. So even if the church only provides the numbers of the hymns that we're going to be singing from our homes, I've always got that with me on my phone.
Yeah. Yeah, we're getting comments about, you know, why not an electronic PDF? You know, I would be open to using an electronic worship aid, et cetera. So I think that's definitely something to consider. I think, you know, on a real practical level, so we also, in one of our previous conversations, spoke with Vicki Klima and Father Michael Jonkis about just how sensory rich our experience of liturgy is. And especially in a virtual environment, we are limiting to basically 2 senses. And one way to break open and add a 3rd sense, even, if I'm a parish that uses a subscription resource, a breaking bread or a seasonal missalette or celebrating the Eucharist or a hardbound hymnal, if there's a way that I can get those 2 people to have at home, there's the tactile experience of me on my couch pew that's similar to me in my pew and in my church building. Even it smells the same as it does there. And you know, especially if you're a parish that uses seasonal resources where there's a shelf life for them. I know what my community has done is organized a way to hand them out to people and then collected a suggested donation of $2, $5, something like that. And what they found is they've been able to order more if they need them, but also me paying $2 to bring home my seasonal missalette doesn't interfere with my other contributions or giving. I don't even think about it necessarily. But for my church, who's trying to, you know, consider their own income and budgets, it's helping offset the cost of that resource. So there are creative ways to equip people at home, or I bring that with me when I go into the building or not, that also can be done in a way that provides a distance but helpful interaction with parishioners, and also can do a simple collection to help make ends meet right now. So again, there are some practical ways to think about this distribution.
One of the other great things about putting something substantial like a hymnal or a missalette in people's hands at home is that there's so much material in those resources that are formative, that are explanatory, that, you know, when you're in church for an hour, you don't have a chance to read the beautiful long description of what the liturgy of the word is, but it's there. And so this gives people an opportunity to maybe dig a little bit deeper into their understanding of liturgy. I know when I was a kid, I was a liturgy geek and collected missalettes from our church. And so when we dispose of them every 6-8 weeks, whatever, I'd ask if I could have one. And of course they said yes, because weirdo. And then I would keep them, and I would, mark what, collect the priest did and all this. But what it did was, I said this in second grade, what it did was form me in liturgy. And so, I mean, I couldn't help but grow up and, and be a liturgist. So to think of taking a resource like that and putting it in a child's hands and saying, have at it, discover everything in this little book, could really be a great chance to extend formation opportunities to people.
Yeah.
A few more on this, please. Our parish has been offering hymnals for home use, and a couple of us have been delivering them. And I created a little sheet for the people telling them what day it is, where the readings are found, how to use the hymnal, reminding them that there's commentary on the Mass, teaching them with all those numbers at the bottom of the hymn mean, inviting them to maybe start to read your favorite texts. Are you seeing favorite authors or composers? So literally teaching people how to interact with the hymnal. And then briefly, we had some questions about places that might have resources in the pews or cleaning them. Got to be careful with what you use to clean them. The American Libraries Associations now are also, we're starting to learn from them. They're telling us how long will a virus last on what type of cover. When we put our boxes away and we open them up, we're quite certain that in a couple weeks, that virus won't be there. They're saying anywhere from 48 hours to 2 weeks. And one question here, or comment, if you're in a tiny church, and once again, safety and everything is different, if you're in a tiny church, there's only one Mass. Is it necessary to remove the hymnals or the missalettes if it's going to be a week before people interact? So I want to be careful there, but you might be in a situation where you can keep things in the pews. So
yeah. Are there, there's also a question here from Kristen who asks, any suggestions for safely distributing worship aids? I mean, I think a lot of directives, talk about producing a worship aid if that's what your community is going to do. And then after that liturgy, people are directed to throw that liturgy away, or throw that worship aid away, not the liturgy away, throw the worship aid away. I'm distracted by the crying in the background upstairs. Is there any suggestion for how to get it to people in the first place? Because obviously a stack where people are just grabbing and taking could be a problem if I'm touching more than the one worship aid, especially if I'm one of those people who has to lick my fingers before I pick up a piece of paper. So any suggestions for how we might get that to people?
Well, a lot of people are commenting on their primacy of delivering them as a PDF or as some type of online viewable resource. And I think that's obviously the cleanest way to make this happen. I'm wondering too, if we've talked a lot about I think it's hand in hand with music ministry, the ministry of hospitality. And is it more clean, sanitary, to have someone, a gloved individual or someone who has sanitized their hands, handing the worship aid with, on the one side of the paper and then people receiving it on the other side of the paper? I think that's also an option. I don't know if Wendy and Michael have any other suggestions.
Yeah, I think that's the best suggestion. Encourage people, if they are able, to bring their tablet or their phone, to use that as their resource. And then, you're not actually having to hand out to every single person the printed resource. You're just giving that to the people that, weren't able to bring it electronically. So I think, really what we're talking about here is risk management. What can we do to cut down the risk, but still live, still worship, still celebrate? And I think this is one of those ways to do it. The absolute safest way to stay safe is to stay home and view your liturgy, on TV or on your tablet or whatever, and use only your own resources in your own house. But if we're going to step out, which we're all learning how to do so very gradually, the idea of an usher who has clean hands, handing out a worship aid to somebody who takes it by the other side. Then the question is, when those worship aids were printed, were they contaminated in any way? Again, you have to assess the risks, maybe print them enough ahead of time that that risk is lowered, and just continually in everything you do, be thinking about risk management.
Yeah.
One of the comments, I'm sorry, Matt, suggested that the worship aids be put in place as people come in, and that might also serve another way of reminding, no, you need to sit here, you need to be 3 pews apart, so it kind of demarks. We had a very nice comment to the panelists. Matt, I don't know if you want to address it, if you see Luke's comment there, but I'd like to jump on that, where
Go ahead.
Luke Rosen just writes in the middle of the webinar here, he says, he appreciates how this webinar is based in moving forward, adapting, and acting based in science. And, you know, so many other things that we've been encountering have been stuck in despair. Yeah, you know, folks, we got to be helpful. And this is no time for giddiness, but boy, it's a time for creativity. And it's just kind of intriguing to think about what's going to be the experience of instrumental music. What's going to be the experience of having people hum or ooh or whatever. So thanks for that comment, Luke. That's what we're trying to do here.
Or even to help, I mean, developing the practice of Lexio or Visio or Audio Divina, or, I mean, there are all kinds of opportunities for other catechesis, for other faith formation. Speaking of creativity and thinking of other solutions, Siobhan has a comment here. She writes, music is a principal symbol of ritual, but it operates on many levels. Are there other ways we can show our unity? Gesture or posture, for instance? What about silence? With our singing, we encourage one another with our full conscious active participation. How else might we signal that? And I think for presiders, to especially be able in an intentional way to draw attention and frame that silence, I think is helpful. Or for us in however we communicate with our communities in a catechetical way, in a faith formation way, I think would be important. There's also interesting things being done by places looking at, you know, from the ASL community and the deaf community. Are there simple ways we can learn, you know, ASL responses to and with your spirit? Are there other ways that we can not only show our unity, participate fully in a different way, but also show solidarity with members of our community? Again, it's offered as an idea to think outside the box, depending on where we're at. So thank you, Siobhan, for that. We've been talking a lot about worship aids and things like that. So I want to make sure that we look at bullet point number 4 here on our list. Always respect copyrights for printed or mechanical reproduction. Contact publishers for annual licenses. And of course, this is something that is near and dear to us. Specifically, we'd like to draw people's attention to one license. And Kate, I don't know if you want to add anything, or Michael, specifically about one license and the things that we're doing now or made available to communities at this time.
Yeah, one license is definitely something you want to become familiar with now if you haven't become familiar with it already. We're working on expanding the one license staff, I know, so that we can make sure that we can keep up with the influx of people who are having questions or would like to get registered. So one license is a reporting business, a reporting company. What's their line? Reporting. You report. This is where if you sang the Gloria from the Mass of Creation, you go to one license and say, I reprinted this and I report that I used it. And that's so that we can make sure that at the end of the year that all of our artists are compensated appropriately based on the usage of their material. You can download there all of the reprint boxes if you are making a PDF or some other type of worship aid that's not a hymnal or a missalette. And so you really need to become familiar with that. There are some places where I don't think that this is a preferred solution, but there are some places that still want to have a virtual offering, but they're not going to reprint anything. They're just going to broadcast, for lack of a better word, their service with the music as performed by cantor and keyboardist, for example. And in that case, they're not reprinting anything. So we've just instituted the brand new type of license that if you really don't need to pay for the license for reprinting everything, we have a podcast and streaming license. So that way you're still covered. You're doing this legally and responsibly when you're broadcasting somebody else's material, being the Gloria from the Mass of Creation, if that's the case. And so you can look into purchasing that type of license instead of a complete license. That being said, if you're broadcasting and you're also reprinting material, there's a bundle pricing for both of those things. And One License has lots more information on their website, onelicense.net, and they also are very responsive if you email or call. Just understand that there's quite a bit of people doing the same thing right now.
That's right. And
I
so
know, for me,
go
it's
ahead.
really helpful to remember that, I mean, it covers like 200 publishers. So, so many, there's so much music that's covered. And then if you're doing a lot of praise and worship music at your church, the license that would cover that would be ccli.com, ccli.com. And so that's another one to keep in mind if that's the style of music that you're utilizing quite a bit.
Right. Absolutely. And combining that bullet point, looking at copyrights, and also then thinking about the next bullet point too. I know I've received messages from multiple parishes or congregations about the music that they're trying to choose being familiar. So whether I have a worship aid or I have my hymnal at home or not, it's something people could sing along with or participate in. And one thing I'd encourage people to think about too is, as you're using familiar repertoire, perhaps if that's the route that you're going, or even public domain tunes, texts, etc., that doesn't mean that you can't find a new accompaniment or a new harmonization. There are other ways, again, to think musically. How can we add something into the mix here? Only because I know our catalog better than I know other publishers. I'm thinking even of things like, Tony Alonso's Revival 1 and Revival 2 collections, for example. You're using that hymn tune, you're using Resignation. You might be using the public domain text, but a different way to add different sound here too. Under that bullet point, again, in light of this, reconsidering repertoire, choosing hymn text tunes, which people easily know. Other things that the three of you are hearing, seeing, ideas that you're incorporating in your own communities for repertoire?
Yeah, go ahead, I've talked a lot.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that there's a good question here from Mary Beth about how people can continue to keep this holy, keep Sunday holy by singing and hearing scripture and praying, if engaging on a screen for liturgy is not their best way of engagement. And I think absolutely, if you are equipped either alone or with the members of your household, I think we still have a dispensation from the obligation of Sunday liturgy. And we need to remember that above all importance is our safety, our own safety, and especially the safety of those most vulnerable in our communities and in our families. And so if we would like to, utilize that particular allowance now, I think that there are still ways, whether you go to USCCB and you click on readings and you read the readings for the day, or you have, again, a missalette or a hymnal in your home where you can follow traditional liturgy of the word, or if you are one of those nerds like Wendy, who probably has a Roman Missal in your house. And just to remind yourself of the flow, the order, the pacing, I think that that's a good thing to practice, a good thing to kind of ignite your domestic church prayer life. One of the questions that I've had, and I wonder if a lot of other people have too, was, is this a time to visit the idea of Sunday celebrations in the absence of a priest, for those areas of the country that have been encouraged to offer more masses, but who maybe have really maxed out the capacity of their ministers, or their ministers are potentially in a high-risk group. And I learned that you'd have to check in with your local diocese to see if that's an option for you. Because Wendy, what is the ruling on that for us here?
I think, again, it's check with your local ordinary, and they'll be very specific about if that's an opportunity that you can avail yourselves of or not. So yeah, in all of these things, I've seen questions come through, well, in Texas, we're pretty much, we're going. Here in Chicago, we're not going yet, and when we go, it'll be small sacramental celebrations of 10 or less. So again, you just really have to look at your local circumstances and your local directives and regulations. One thing I did see on the FDLC website, along with the document we're looking at today, is they're collecting guidelines and directives from dioceses as they get them. So it's a great place to go and see what other people are doing in other parts of the country. or maybe even, in the neighboring diocese, so you get an idea of what's happening kind of in your area, your territories.
Yeah. And so no matter how you are kind of exploring how to pray with your community or with another community or even in your home church, I think it's best to use music that is familiar to you and that's easily engaged. I know particularly, like, I have young kids in my house, a young kid in my house. I'm not counting my husband as a young kid, but one of the best ways that I can sing with her is to sing the stuff that's familiar to her. So guess what? This weekend, Twinkle Twinkle Little Star is going to be a sacred song. And also, she's really good at call and response. So we have lots of short refrains or call and response material in all of our sacred music catalogs that would be a good thing to visit at this point, especially if it's a familiar tune already to your congregation.
And
I saw another really good counterpoint here, and that's maybe, especially with live streaming liturgies, this is a great opportunity to introduce new music or a new mass setting to your people, because for the moment, we're not encouraging full, active, robust singing in most of our places. So that's a nice counterpoint. Maybe this is a chance to introduce a new repertoire. Also, on the FDLC list, I think it's really good to draw our attention to, exploring call and response, exploring antiphons. I mean, the communion song, maybe ideally, should be a psalm setting or a verse and antiphon, so that as people are going up in a normal communion procession, they're able to participate without something in their hands. So it's a good time to kind of maybe reevaluate the moments in our liturgy that require music, and how do we truly sing the liturgy even in the best of times without something in our hands when we can't have something in our hands.
Two quick points here on the chat related to repertoire. So first from Peter Kolar. Hi, Peter. Singing and participation are two different things. We're only discouraging singing, but not participation. Sing to the Lord points out that participation can be internal as well as external. Familiar hymns can bring comfort and can still foster internal participation, even in the absence of singing. So thanks, Peter, for that. And then from Father Brad Zamora, who writes, what I'm finding in this moment is the importance of lyrics that not only speak to the scriptures of a particular weekend or celebration, but also lyrics that speak to this moment. The power that new music and old has had on the lives of people in this moment cannot be overlooked. It's that whole scripture in one hand and newspaper in the other idea. Now more than ever, I find my soul yearning for a lyric that speaks to the real feelings we all have. So again, thank you, Father Brad, for sharing that. Again, using familiar tunes, perhaps with a new text as a way to do that. Michael.
Yeah, I want to do a glasses more than half full when it comes to repertoire here. I mean, if we can just for a second as musicians walk through the Mass and think what's going to be possible. All right, we can have prelude music like normal. So maybe we have an instrumental processional. Why not? We've got a refrain Gloria. People know the refrain by memory. And if you haven't done refrain Glorias, now's maybe time to do it. If a psalm refrain is worth its good, it's immediately respondable. You hear it once you sing it back. You don't use a hymnal or a mislet or worship aid for an alleluia, for your holy, holy, for your acclamation, your amen, your Lamb of God. These are all memorized. Your communion processionals are memorized. It's not that we're going to have no music to sing. We've got plenty of music that can be sung from memory, echo settings, and encountering new forms. So once again, it's not going to be this bleak situation. We're almost there already with the repertoire we have from memory or can do. So stay positive and be hopeful with this.
And I want to add in one other comment, because I think this is really important. And again, first of all, to emphasize, you got to see what your local state, your local diocese, what your directives are. So please, again, we know many of you are joining us from all over the country, so we don't know your own particular situation. However, if allowed to sing, I think, there you have it. I think, Michael, your point is well made. Mary Dahl asks, music familiar to which segment of our parish? And I think that's an interesting question as we think about, again, inclusive practice and inclusivity, especially for parishes that maybe have a very different repertoire at 5 p.m. on Saturday than you do at 9 a.m. on Sunday or 1 p.m. on Sunday, especially as we're looking at parishes that have masses in multiple languages. So again, I think this is a really important question and important consideration, and perhaps opportunity to also cross-pollinate some of our repertoire to build that unity and that familiarity too. Lots of questions, lots of other things here. We have about 15 minutes left, and I want to look at, again, the, if you take a look at some of the other bullet points, and we've talked about increased use of psalmody, antiphons, we've referenced that. Certainly repetitive refrains, Taizé-style hymns is certainly something at GIA that we're awfully interested in, having a lot of the music of Taizé in our catalog. Appropriate parts of the Mass, at appropriate parts of the Mass, considering texts and tunes which bring comfort. Speaking of that, and then also going back to Father Brad's comment, Kate, Michael, if I'm someone who's looking for maybe not necessarily a new tune, or maybe not necessarily a new composition, but I'm looking for a text that might speak to this time or situation. I want to introduce something new that way. What's your recommendation for me to look for those texts, to find those resources?
That's perfect. I would, one of the things that I love the most at GIA is our hymn text collections. And those are, you'll hear more about this soon, because we're coming up with a new web-based platform where you'll be able to see these things as individual texts. But right now, they're all bound in books like this. So here's a hymnary by Adam Tice with all brand new texts in them. We've got a bunch of Adam Tice hymnaries, a bunch of Dolores Duffner hymnaries, a bunch of David Bjorlin hymnaries. We've got a bunch of, for years and years, Randy Sensmeyer was our hymnary editor at GIA, and now we've got Adam Tice on board to help us cultivate some more of these hymn texts. And there really are some gems in there. And one of the things that I'm excited about, I would definitely, especially if you're like a composer and you're looking for inspiration to do some writing, these are great jumping off points if you don't end up using the actual text in here yourself. But I'm excited that we'll be able to offer them as individual downloads for parish use, mostly because people who don't know about these hymnaries don't know about so many of the gems inside them. So that's a really good place to look for new texts.
Yeah, and I want to, and I know Father Brad feels this too, it's going to be this wonderful opportunity to find a hymn that says, wow, this is right for this parish at this time, but we also need to make sure those first few weeks are going to be gather us in, all are welcome, the absolute songs that make St. Mary's in Riverside St. Mary's, as opposed to old St. Mary's downtown Chicago, which makes, so it's going to be that balance of the songs that we sing at home. I think Ann McGuire had mentioned that. What are the songs we sing at our home church? But that definitely means there's also room for something new, these new texts, or any text you've not explored before. But keep them in a healthy balance, plenty to choose from. Yes.
Two other quick things. Father Brad posts again to say that they're using some of the Meinrad tones with antiphons. And of course, Meinrad tones or things like it could be a wonderful resource to look at right now. One of the things that we've been doing as a company, just in terms of outreach, is producing Spotify playlists for each weekend. We're providing recordings for every part of the Mass, including Mass settings, that either could be incorporated, someone could pray along with, or just for listening to help keep Sunday holy, as Mary Beth asked about. We're working at putting in recordings for our hymnal series there. So if you use Gather 3, which is available in the hymnal app, you could also find the recordings for the entries of Gather 3 in Spotify to be able to, again, help people find a way to pray along with this. And of course, all of our recordings are available for purchase and download also. In the 10 minutes or so we have left, I want to make sure that we take a look at any of the other bullet points that maybe we haven't fully explored. We haven't talked about the last one, cleaning the keyboard, cantor stand, and instruments between masses. I know there's been some conversation in the chat about what do you do with shared instruments? Like if your parish owns a guitar or multiple guitarists share it, what do you do? Obviously, that's going to be something. Don't forget to clean the keyboard as you're cleaning pews and things. Another thing, not to go back to the hymnal app again, but you can also find or purchase these digital accompaniment books if you have multiple keyboardists or you don't want to use that physical copy. Again, there are other ways to get electronic resources. Any other thoughts for that last bullet point, just the real practical care of our music area for instrumentalist cantors?
I think as Michael mentioned, especially when you're dealing with books or precious instruments, you have to be really careful of the cleaning supplies you use. So do some research on that before you start spraying down your piano with Lysol and wrecking the ebony finish and all those kinds of things. So just be careful with that. I think it's gonna, we all know that for the duration, we're gonna have to, carry some personal hand sanitizer with you if you can get your hands on it, and just continually, every time before you touch something, sanitize, play, sanitize again. I mean, you're looking out for others as well as yourself when you're doing that. So do some research. More and more dioceses are coming out with specific guidelines on cleaning and supplies to be used while cleaning. So again, it's still a shortage of supply, but I think it's important for all of us to keep up on that, both for our personal safety and for the safety and care of our instruments.
Great. And then in the time that we have left, again, a lot of what we've been talking about in terms of participation, of course, naturally has to do with how we're resuming public worship. I think also, one of those FDLC guidelines that you mentioned, and Mary Beth adds, and microphones too, of course, please don't forget to clean your microphones, the ambo, etc. So one of the other things in the FDLC guidelines, of course, is considering that when we are at reduced capacity and people are opting out of attending public worship once we reopen, we are going to have to continue. Many places will choose to continue to live stream liturgies. And I know we want to talk a little bit about best practices when it comes to live streaming. And I think one of the best suggestions, and I don't know if this came from you, Michael, but I'm going to credit you with it, is to encourage full conscious active participation for those who are at home. Having a second cantor, second person, even somewhere else in the church on a microphone to respond with the voice of the assembly, so that I at home, praying along with that live stream liturgy, have another voice that I'm joining, I think is a great, great pastoral suggestion, because I know in my parish, the first couple of weeks as we were figuring this out, there was a lot of, the Lord be with you. And there's a pregnant pause. Lift up your heart, and there's a pregnant pause. And it's uncomfortable when we're used to joining all of these other people. So again, that's a just simple way to perhaps add that into your live streaming practice to make things more comfortable, more interactive at home. Any other things we've been seeing, panelists, best practices when it comes to live streaming to encourage full conscious active participation at home?
I think one thing to keep in mind is just to go along with the current directives. Whatever's happening at Mass should be happening on your live stream. So if your diocesan directive is wear a mask, then you wear a mask on your live stream, even if there's only 3 of you in the building. I think that visual example is super, super important. And I love the idea of having something to participate along with. We've got a group here in Chicago that does virtual Vespers, and we chant the Psalms on a Meinrad tone. And because it's Zoom, you can't all go on at once because it's chaos. But you chant along with that one voice. And, in your ears, you hear you and you hear that one voice, and it's community singing. I mean, it feels and it sounds really good, rather than that whole thing of, the psalmist, in a perfect world, the psalmist sings the psalm refrain and then waits for the sound to come back from the assembly. But that pregnant pause is really awkward on a virtual, on a recorded or a live stream liturgy. So, yeah, I think this is the one time where I think it's great if the presider isn't going, the Lord be with you and with your spirit. I mean, but if somebody else is doing that, and even if it's somebody off camera, so you've got a voice, that's a great idea.
I think there's some parishes that are doing really incredible things with their live stream presentations of the liturgies. For instance, St. Monica's in the Los Angeles area, I believe Dan Howes is there, who helps present, like for instance, they'll have a giant large flat screen TV up by the altar, and there will be this beautiful presentation of their music ministers in their own homes with the little picture box windows all up one next beside the other, where you've got somebody in their home playing the piano and laying the bass track, and somebody who could cantor the psalm or who could lead the particular acclamation or hymn is there present. And you can see their face and you can see them singing, you can hear their voice. I think that's that takes time, and it takes some equipment and some learning curve here. But I'm hoping that as a part of our conversations too, we're going to be in touch with some of those people who are doing a really good job of their virtual presentations so that we can become even more engaged. And I would say the other thing that's been super on my mind is this tactile experience of celebrating liturgy together. And so while we're in our homes and we're doing the responsible things as we continue to worship while sheltering in place, we're missing that dip of our fingers in the holy water as we go in. We're missing that taste of Eucharist. We're missing. So just to spend some time in reflection, thinking about the gift of water when we take a shower, and the gift of food when we prepare a meal. Those things for me are all extensions of and ways that we can deepen our experience of the liturgy, whether we're watching here on a virtual live stream, or whether we are finally reunited again all together and able to touch and taste and see. And I think this is the time when we deepen and expand our definition of that.
Yeah, I think that's great, Kate. And I think, as we're closing out our time, I think it's a good way to remind us too that, one of the things that this conversation series, that again today is our 8th installment in this conversation series, has produced is really a library of these conversations that at the time were standalone, that now are all intersecting, of course. In our very first conversation, and you can see all of these on our Facebook page or on our YouTube channel, Jen Fiducia talked a lot about that everyday sacramentality, which I think is important. And a couple weeks ago with again, Mike Jonkis and Vicky Klima talking about that sensory experience and how do you particularly attune to this. And then talking about guidelines, we have Catholic household blessings and prayers that Wendy is holding up, right? We have all kinds of ways to approach this. And so I encourage you, if you have found today helpful, to look at some of those past conversations, and also to let us know what would be helpful for future conversations as well. Final thing before we end, Diana McAlintel writes, back to the live stream mass topic. She writes, at live stream mass, have a member of the baptismal priesthood who is physically present at the church address the people who are watching at home, maybe before mass, to encourage their participation, but also to say that they are taking their full participation even more seriously on behalf of those who cannot be physically present. It's a way to acknowledge that the role of the baptismal priesthood is essential to Mass. I think that's a wonderful, wonderful recommendation. And again, simple things that we can do by showing other people who are there, by having that other voice we pray along with, by having that physical resource in my hands, that connection, that feeling of, like to your point, Wendy, singing along with another person, communal singing. Any of those little things we can do are so important. We are unfortunately out of time. Again, these resources can be found at fdlc.org/COVID. Please take a look at these. Please take a look at our other conversations. You will receive a follow-up email from me with links to this, to the archived video and other resources. We really appreciate everything all of you who joined us are doing to help your communities navigate through these questions. So thank you for doing the hard work here in unfamiliar and uncertain territory. Again, if there's any way we can help you navigate through this, we're more than happy to at least try. So please feel free to reach out. Thanks again, and we look forward to having you join us on a future Homecoming Sunday conversation. God bless, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Wendy.